Jane Schwartzberg was a 31-year-old newlywed when she was first diagnosed with breast cancer. Eventually, Jane was declared cancer-free. She moved on with her life and gave birth to two beautiful children, only to have the cancer return 10 years later.
And now, living with an incurable cancer, she is here to give advice to other women suffering from or knows someone suffering from breast cancer. And she also writes about it in her new book, Naked Jane Bears All. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me and for shedding light on a really important and heavy-duty topic. Thank you.
What went through your mind when the cancer came back?
It was the worst. I mean, if you can imagine your worst fear and being told that your worst fear is actually true, what came to mind was, it can't be. This cannot be true. Someone has to be wrong. This cannot be what's really happening. But eventually, little by little, I had to accept what was reality. Yeah.
And I know that for my mom, who's been cancer-free for 10 years, every time she goes back for a checkup, it weighs very, very heavily on her. You never fully leave it behind you.
Absolutely right. And I say you live scan to scan, because every time you go, you have the sword hanging over you, and you have the panic and the stress. But I will say it gets easier.
So tell us about your book.
Well, I wrote a book with my co-author, Marcy, because my hope was to share with people many of the lessons that I've learned over the past bunch of years dealing with illness. And this is the book that I wish I had read, particularly when I was diagnosed the second time. And I didn't find that book, so we wrote it. And it's about family. It's about the importance of really taking in the love that people have for you in order to get through a hard time. It also talks about how to support people going through this kind of challenge. So it was hard to write, but really an honor for me to put it out there.
And extremely important to write as well. We mentioned that you have two kids. How do you have that conversation with those two kids? It's not obviously something they want to hear or you want to say.
Really good question, and that's probably the hardest thing about this. I have a 7-year-old son and a 10-year-old daughter, and my husband and I consulted with a professional, and we were told that we should be upfront with them. So we had a family meeting, we sat down with them, and we said, remember, Mommy was sick before you were born, Mommy's sick again. And we explained to them that there are going to be a lot of doctor's appointments and hospital appointments, but that we love them very much, and that I'm going to do everything I can every day to be here with them for as long as I possibly can. And we were really upfront with them. And the most important thing, and I very much hope to get this across in my book, I am here. And I try every day with my husband and our families to give them lots of love and to do that for as long as I can. And I think we all should be thinking in those terms, because nobody knows.
Yeah, none of us know how long we have, sure.
How did your children react? Have they been dealing with it verbally? I mean, how have they been expressing themselves to you?
I mean, now I'm doing very well and I feel well, so it's not so much of a thing. My kids went through a very hard time. In school, they were sort of having a hard time expressing themselves, and I think they were very scared for a while, but they're doing amazingly well now.
What is your message for a woman out there who's just getting perhaps bad news from an oncologist or from a radiologist? What would you tell them at that very frightening moment?
My message to them is, even though it's a very challenging diagnosis and there are going to be brutal, brutal times ahead, that every one of us truly can construct a life of joy, of happiness, being productive in our days, having a terrific life despite the diagnosis and despite whatever treatments, whatever temporary pain, physically or emotionally, a person has to go through.
And to someone who's supporting someone who's going through a cancer diagnosis, what would you say to them? What's something that I would want to know if my wife was facing this?
What I would say, and people ask me that all the time, I would say to really be comfortable being quiet in the waiting room. And what I mean by that is, this is such a hard topic, and when you have someone who's sick, I think people tend to want to fill the air with words and say, you're really going to be okay. But that's not always the best thing for the person who's going through it. So I would say, show up, be present, be loving, and don't feel like you have to do or say or make things right. Just showing up for the person is an amazing, amazing thing and a real source of support to people like me going through it.
Well, Jane, thank you so much for your courage and for writing this book and for being with us today.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. You can hear more from Jane and about her experience. Pick up a copy of Naked Jane Bears All.